We're going to begin our next unit with genetics. This is one of my favorite units personally. I really like Punnett squares and thinking about how traits were passed on and why do I personally have blue eyes but everybody else in my family has brown eyes. I just personally think that that's just really interesting. So let's move in and kind of give a little history here about genetics. The father of genetics is considered to be Gregor Mendel. He lived a long time ago. He was actually a monk in a monastery, and he had a few jobs. He was a teacher actually at a local school, and so he did conduct scientific experiments, but he was also a gardener. Like at the monastery everybody has a job, and so he was the garden, attended the garden, and he actually used his time in the garden to really get us going with genetics. He bred different garden plants to study how the traits of the plants were inherited, and he called things that were inheritable characters. So for instance, flower color, because he was studying plants, so flower color, here you can see in the picture we have different ways that the flowers are. Terminal means they're all on the end. Axial, they can come off at different points. Tall versus short. There were round and wrinkled seeds. We have different types of colors of pea pods. So those were all characters, things that are inheritable, and that's where we get our word characteristic. Current day. He also said that things have traits. Traits are different variations of character. So for instance, height is a characteristic, and yet so then the different traits for height would be tall versus short in plants. A little bit more complex in humans. But another example, another characteristic could be pod color, and then the different varieties of that trait would be green pods or yellow pods. And then we also could have the different flower colors like white versus purple. As he was looking at different, plants and the different characters that they had, he did come up, we have a lot of terminology, and one of them is true breeding. So a true breeding is referring to the parent, and if a parent's characteristic is what the offspring's characteristic is, then we say it's true breeding. They produce offspring that's identical to themselves. For example, if he took a purple flowered plant and mated like 2 purple flowers, then and all of the flowers were also purple, that would be true breeding. For instance, if we take a look at this picture, this would be true breeding. This particular bird, they both have identical traits, and all their kids have identical traits as well. A hybrid is a cross between true breeding parents. So in this second example, you have the green and yellow crossed with the blue. So that's going to be a hybrid. This particular offspring, although it has the traits, it has the outward trait of, parent number 1, it doesn't have all of the same genetic information as this particular bird does. Even though they look alike, this parent's DNA, because both of them started with the same trait, this bird's DNA is going to be different. This bird right here has 50% of the DNA of the blue bird. And so if you notice, as this bird reproduces someday, it has the ability to produce a bird with characteristics like it does, and also to have some of the blue like its original parent was as well. That's where we get our word hybrid in cars today too. It's a cross between like electric and gasoline. Maybe it has the ability to do both. When we take a look at that, the true breeding, okay, this would be a true breeding. If we look at maybe a tall versus a dwarf plant, you have 2 capital T's, and we'll get into all the different vocabulary what that means, but notice it's true breeding because it has 2 capital T's. It doesn't it has to pass on 50% of its DNA, so it's going to pass on a capital T regardless. Meiosis says every sex cell from this tall parent is going to have a capital T in it. The dwarf parent, same idea, only it has the lowercase t, so every reproductive cell is going to have a little t in it. Punnett squares, something you may have practiced with maybe in middle school or in a past science class. Punnett square just allows us to see what the traits of the offspring are going to look like. So if you take this tall parent versus the short parent, they put that on the side, and fill in all the boxes. These boxes represent what the children could look like, and every single one of their children are going to have a capital T, and that capital T represents tall. And so that tall parent or child is going to look like one of its parents, but notice it does have the little t there, so it has the ability, when it has children of its own, to pass on genetic information for the dwarf trait. So the P generation, in this case, this is the P generation. These are the original parents, and they are true breeding because they have DNA that no matter what they pass on, it will be identical to their own DNA. So that's the true breeding. The F1 generation, which is this part circled, this is the F1 generation. They are hybrids. So they're hybrids because they have capital T and they have a little t, every single box, capital and lowercase. So they're a hybrid because they're a combination of each parent's DNA. And then this is our F2 generation here. Our F2 generation, we've taken our F1, big T, little t, and we've put that as the parent at the top and on the sides. So when you get to the F2 generation, we actually have a lot of variety. We could have the true breeding tall, we could have the tall individual but has DNA for the dwarfism, and then we also have little t, so we could have that dwarf size come back. As far as Mendel's experiments, one of the ones that he did was purple versus white flowers. And so the P generation, he took a purple flowered plant and a white flowered plant, and he crossed them together, and he expected, since we have some purple and 50% white parent, 50% purple plant, we're going to get a combination of both, but that's not what he got. All of the offspring of those plants had purple flowers, all of them. And so his question, maybe similar to yours, well, why? What happened to the white flowers? Why can we have a white flowered plant and none of the offspring have white flowers? So he decided to go to the next generation, the F2 generation, which means he took these plants right here and he crossed them, took seeds from each and crossed them together. And this is what he gets. So this is our P generation, our purple and white. All the F1s were purple. Now he crosses all of these purple flowers together, and he still gets quite a bit of purple, but he also sees white show back up. It's a 3-to-1 ratio. So we've got 75% purple to 25% white. So the white didn't die out. Okay, that trait didn't go away. It just was kind of hidden for a generation. The white flowers do reappear, and this happens in human genetics as well. You might have a trait that a grandparent has, but neither one of your parents had, so it kind of skipped a generation, and that can happen. So as we continue through genetics, we'll get into some of the vocabulary that we need to kind of start doing some Punnett squares, but we're going to end today just with that much so far.